Hello and welcome to For Every Response, the podcast from Emergency Services Times, sponsored by MSA Safety. I'm Catherine Levin and I'm the editor of Emergency Services Times. In this episode of the pod, we're going to focus on the ambulance service, and Lanna is talking to Adam Hopper, who works for the Ambulance Chiefs Association, ACE. They're going to talk about a campaign around reducing violence against ambulance workers. It's a follow-on from a conversation I had back at the show in September 2024. And without wanting to give too much away, but to whet your appetite for this episode, I just want to say that this is a lot about data. Adam talked to me about data, and it continues to be about data, understanding what the problem is in order to do something about the problem. And that's really at the basis of all campaigns. We see them a lot across emergency services, particularly in fire. In my past, I've dealt with the Fire Kills campaign, and you do really have to understand who you're targeting, why you're targeting, and how will you know it's successful. And that's really good to hear from Adam in terms of this campaign, about how they're using data to inform it. He tells us about the underreporting, which is interesting in itself, that there are tens of thousands of incidents of violence against ambulance workers. And it just amazes me that anybody would want to attack a paramedic or a healthcare worker who is there to keep them safe. We see that with firefighters being attacked, particularly around bonfire night, and you see disorder on the streets and how police are also attacked. So this is a problem that crosses the services, and so what you hear from Adam and from Lanna today, you could easily pick that up and look at it in terms of another part of blue lights. So don't be surprised when they talk about data, as I've said, but also about culture, about language, but also about money. At the end of the day, it costs loads of money to put these campaigns on, and when you have to start tightening your belt, often campaigns and the things that are cut. And we see this with Adam. Adam tells us this campaign may not survive the changes at NHS England, where they'll be subsumed within the Department for Health. So that is something to look for, and understand that if you're going to cut money and cut campaigns, then you will also cut results. And I think that kind of short-termist thinking will not be good for the ambulance service. And I hope that Adam and others within ACE can continue to influence and campaign for retention of money like this, to make sure that our paramedics are safe. So sit back, have a listen, and see what you think of the conversation between Adam and Lanna.
Today, I am delighted to be joined by Adam Hopper, the National Ambulance Violence Prevention and Reduction Operational Lead for the Association of Ambulance Chief Executives. Welcome, Adam.
Thanks for having me.
So if you've been following our coverage, you may remember that my colleague Catherine interviewed Adam at the Emergency Services show last year, where they spoke about the importance of using data to improve the safety of ambulance staff. So in this episode, we'll pick up from that conversation to hear what's changed, what challenges remain, and how some national support measures are really sort of helping to shift the culture around safety and wellbeing in the NHS. So for those listening, Adam, who may not know your role or the work that you're involved in, can you give us a quick introduction, what you focus on, and how does it connect to the safety of ambulance staff?
Yeah, certainly. So the Association of Ambulance Chief Executives are a membership body which sit above the NHS statutory ambulance services, which provide advice, guidance, leadership, policy, best practice, and I suppose a collaborative governance structure, bringing all the different professions together from around the UK ambulance services. So how that then translates into my role as National Ambulance Violence Prevention Lead, or VPR leads. If you hear me talk about VPR, I'll try not to use acronyms where I can, and I appreciate it's difficult. So that really translates into my role in understanding how we best impact the different ambulance services. So we spent a lot of time focusing on data around education, whether that might be our conflict resolution training that the frontline staff would receive, the education and provision for the corporate or support staff, as they may be known. So your violence prevention leads, your security teams within your trusts, what education are they receiving and undertaking to really further their own development and also bring that professional aspect to the forefront. We've spent a lot of time developing a restrictive interventions program, which is designed to develop ambulance bespoke restrictive practice for the first time. Something which the sector really needed but didn't necessarily step into, because with that sort of the connotation away from the mental health sort of trusts, but we knew that we had that element going on in terms of what's happening in the ambulance world as well. We've done quite a substantial amount of media work, hence the podcast today. But when I came into the sector, I suppose the best way to phrase it is I didn't have any idea just how much violence was in around the ambulance service. I've worked in the NHS for nearly 19 years, and the amount of violence in the North East Ambulance, which is the smallest English trust, was quite profound at that point. So we really wanted to highlight some of the work, some of the violence that actually goes on. So we've had 2 iterations of our work with our Fear Media campaign, which tell the stories of our frontline crew, and also a call handler about the violence and the vile abuse that they receive, really sort of highlighting the humans behind the uniforms. We've done a lot of work around sharing and highlighting evidence-based best practice. Now, it may sound like a bit of a buzzword, but actually pulling out some of those interventions that work, initiatives that are starting to really change the way we think about violence in the very modern and contemporary terms. So really pulling out that and sharing it around the UK. It's been a fantastic sort of opportunity to oversee the community practice, our National Ambulance Violence and Security Group. I suppose just to add an extra to that, we've recently been nominated as a finalist for an award at the Workplace Violence Reduction Awards. We didn't win, but I suppose just testament of how far the group's come and the work that they've done with that. So there's an awful lot of working with the trust, the leads, and professionalising VPR. What does it mean? How do we raise the floor of where we are so that every trust is supporting up to sort of a minimum level where we can really start to think about violence, not just managing it, but moving into the preventative space as well. So I suppose we're quite removed from the front line being in the association, but what we do have is Claire, who works with me as a clinician, and she provides that crucial lived experience and operational insight. And so all of this sort of ties in through our data, our media, our education work, and I suppose the collaborative strategic work we do with trusts that connects to the front line. They are our sort of intermediaries into the front line and give us that real intelligence and analysis of what's going on at the front line and how we can feed that and fix and support that from a national perspective. And we do that further by sort of thinking about how we support them with post-incident support, facilitating the collaborative work and shared analysis. How do we really pull a thread on the interventions that we're doing? Because the trust will always do something, but how do we actually pull that together and share and learn together so we can say, well, actually, this is national best practice. We're doing something really well that works, and actually driving that forward, and we should be doing this in each of the trusts. So that's a bit of a snapshot of what the sort of the role entails of where we are.
And when you spoke to Catherine last September, you talked about using better data to improve staff safety. What has been the main area of progress since then?
So I am a data person. I love data. I think it should be the foundation of which we build everything on. But going into that and go back to that conversation with Catherine, we talked about how we've made some really good strides in terms of the ambulance sector with our data. It provides one of our strongest, but yet most underutilized evidence bases for the work that we do. So we started with I suppose, data collections, bringing in sort of rough intelligence analysis and from all the incident reports from all the different trusts, trying to provide a national data picture. We did that 4 years ago, and we've maintained that to an extent over the last 3 years. And then we said, actually, let's make this a little bit easier. Why don't we look at something like an ambulance violence data set as a technical guidance document, which we can send to the trust and say, well, actually, we think you should be categorizing this based upon legislation, based upon the need, based upon the types of incidents and intelligence you're having. So we're starting to see, I suppose, the embedding of that violence data set across the trusts. It's a very modern data set using the legislation, sort of staying away from some of the old NHS Protect categories of yesteryear, where something might have been entitled physical abuse, which isn't necessarily something that's derived from law. It's just a specific category, and making very specific categories such as sexual assault and make sure we're getting that right based upon the legislation. The sexual safety culture is another huge work stream from the Association of Ambulance Chief Executives. So being able to support that with that patient or member of public on staff aspect is crucial. So we have that necessary and key intelligence. We spent a lot of time working with trusts around triangulating the metrics for their data. Again, the ambulance services, you'll have heard the story of a data-rich intelligence pool. It's very much the same within the sector as well. We do our best to triangulate in these things. What is there any sort of complaints related to any incidents that we're having? Where are incidents happening? What type of incidents are happening? What's the harm and sort of the impact upon our staff? Are we getting absence related to violence? So we're seeing some of that really play out. And I suppose with one of the risk management systems, it doesn't actually share with the employee staff record for the NHS, which is the entirety of NHS staff are on that. So they created a workaround in one of the trusts to get real sort of demographic information and an analysis of and sort of interrogating for that risk management system where they couldn't create the necessary sort of linkage through the system. And we brought that to the fore and shared it because other trusts use that risk management system. So that actually you can now meet this indicator of your violence standard to actually say, well, we can look at disparity trends against particular demographics based upon this piece of work that was done in the Southeast Coast. So again, we're starting to share some of that aspect and feed that through the different trusts to really sort of think more about our data. I have a saying that data can tell you everything and it can tell you nothing, but it's only when we drill down that next step, what can we do? What can we use to really think about what that data means? So if we take violent incident reporting as a nice category, we can say that we've had 20,000 incidents over the course of the last financial year. But what does it mean? What levels of harm? How many were physical? How many were verbal? How many were abusive, etc.? Starting to drill down into these next steps of our data gives us this real intelligence of what violence prevention might actually mean. Because there's a narrative there. Well, actually, if you have less physical but more verbal, have you created violence prevention using our de-escalation training that might come through our conflict resolution? Bringing all that to the forefront, well, we might have actually de-escalated a potentially worse situation through our own skill set and through our own sort of communications with patients and the members of the public that way. So using data as that foundation is crucial to these initiatives and these interventions. I say we've seen that one down in one of the trusts. We've seen another one there that we're actually looking at, I suppose, emerging risks in terms of patients who are being reported for being violent or aggressive for the first time in their lives. How do we change something there? What interventions can we put in place for that individual to keep them out of the system so that they're not calling us and being abusive to us or being potentially violent to us? So how do we actually share that and pull that out and then really say, there's a really good piece of work. Let's share it amongst the different ambulance services that we can put something in place similar and actually work for the betterment of our patients as well as our staff. I suppose one of the things we've done particularly since September in that chat with Catherine was we spent a lot of time doing some forecasting. So using multiple data sources, our incident reporting, our NHS England staff survey. So we pulled some of those metrics and we looked at the rates of reported physical assault through the staff survey. So physical assault is 75% indicated that the people reported. So that's 25% of all physical assault unreported. Harassment, bullying, and abuse is 45% reported. So again, 55% of incidents are generally not reported in that sort of category. So when we use a little bit of forecasting, a little bit of mathematical modelling, we can actually show that in the English trusts alone, we should be looking at about over 30,000 incidents of violence and abuse for the different trusts. And that's quite a staggering amount for 10 trusts. It almost equates to nearly 10 a day, of 8 to 10 a day if you're looking at it that way. It's very scary, but I think it's that aspect of driving that forecasting and say, well, we know that we haven't actually quite got to the top of this yet, so incident reporting is likely going to come up in line with everything else, and then we can start to think about what it means to really prevent it. So coming back to sort of ACE and what they do, that National Ambulance Fire and Security Group, the community practice has really allowed that open collaboration. We bring people to the forefront when they're doing something new, something interesting, and they can share that. So we've seen that through the disparity trends, through the emerging risks. And this helps us actually feed through things like the media campaigns where we can highlight stories, bring footage for CCTV and body camera footage where things have been through the judicial proceedings, again, highlighting just what our staff go through. It's a very interesting perspective scene. You can hear about and read about abuse every day until you see how someone's behavior can actually make someone feel through surveillance camera footage or in person. It's a completely different kettle of fish. I suppose using that, coming back to forecasting model and sharing a little bit in terms of what we did a press release in January 2025, which the Emergency Service Times picked up on and piggybacked on as well. And what we did is we forecast that winter that we were expecting over 5,000 incidents across the trusts. Unfortunately, we achieved that. So we reported 5,350 across the 14 ambulance services. So in a way, the forecasting, the modelling is working. It's unfortunately forecasting that we're going up and we're going to continue to go up. And that's the scary aspect at the moment of where we are. So I suppose we're thinking about how we then turn that forecasting, that next step, into what it means. I suppose just to come back into that last bit around the forecasting, in the same media release, we've released that we thought we'd expected up to 20,000 incidents for the first time since records begin, to use the popular term. We actually reported over 22,500 incidents across the 14 ambulance services. So if you could come back to that initial modelling around the 30,000, we're still a good 7,500 to 10,000 short of where we actually think we should be reporting incidents.
Wow. And would you say there's been any sort of shift in how trusts are engaging with that data?
Absolutely. One of my personal mantras again is that you can't prevent what you don't know. So I think what we're seeing through the trust is actually the acceptance of increased incident reporting. It's not scaring people like it used to back in the day. If you saw a 15% rise month on month or quarter on quarter. So we're starting to see, I suppose, the acceptance of that narrative that incident reports are going up, and that's the right thing. Our incident reporting culture is progressing. It's doing what it needs to do. But I suppose the additional aspect of that is we report incidents from a very proactive risk management perspective as well. It's not just about, I suppose, putting everybody in prison now, as we've done in years ago. It's actually there's a holistic aspect of what we're doing to that. So to come back to the question, I think 100%. The trusts are completely engaging there. We've got people who aren't necessarily as data enthused as I am, shall we say, thinking about data, using it, and then sort of underlying some of their evidence base and their initiative design with data in mind. And I suppose it's then improving that sort of national, regional analysis and stepping forward from that initial point. So using the data in that fashion within the trust is really helping them actually think about what comes next. So that's additional segmentation, I suppose, using things like, okay, well, we've got the London Ambulance Service as an example, and these are not true figures, but they might have had a huge decrease in reporting of incidents through the staff survey, or those who said experience visit result. They might have experienced a drop in why people have reported it. So how do we actually put some interventions in place, some comms, some media, to say, actually, we want you to report this. We understand that it might not necessarily be with the purpose of pursuing a conviction. It might just be that we actually need to report it this way. I suppose the secondary aspect of that is we've been doing some work from the association on VPR audits and compliance checks with trusts. So there is a violence prevention standard, which is part of the NHS standard contract. So all of the English trusts are regulated by this. So we've been doing some audits around there as well and checking that compliance, highlighting where data could be more impactful and with triangulation, thinking about business intelligence, dashboards, and Power BI, and what can actually pull through and actually really use that. Sharing initiatives again, pulling some of those good threads. We did some work in the Northeast many years ago, developing a geospatial incident mapping. So effectively highlighting hotspots of where incidents were occurring around the trust. So then we could actually share that and say, well, but if you're attending a job, you might be on a station outside of this particular area, but you might get called in this area. Obviously, be more alert for your risk, you'll be personal safety, but you'll be aware of what you're going into, and then triangulating with the types of calls we're going through, thinking about, are we receiving sort of patient on patient, or I suppose community violence, thinking about what comes through there. Is that then going to potentially looking at how there might be an escalated risk of us going into that situation if somebody's been the recipient of violence in the community? Are we potentially putting our staff at more danger by attending those calls, which we have to attend? But I suppose it's bringing that sort of our dynamic risk assessment, to use the buzzword, bringing that to the forefront and thinking, well, actually, you've been given as much information and intelligence as you can based upon some of these systems and information that we have.
And with that, are there any other sort of tangible changes that frontline staff are seeing off the back of this work?
I suppose it's a little bit of a difficult association to make based upon where we sit in terms of in the VPR hub, the Association of Ambulance Chief Executives. However, I suppose what we do have is that developing ambulance sector and their culture and their VPR leads who are working in these roles. And they will support the embedding of the increased reporting culture, and they'll have positive knock-on effects and risk. And I suppose that risk management I alluded to before. So I always like to give the same example. Let's just say we've got an old dementia patient. We'll call him Mr. Smith, and he might be a little bit handsy with male or female paramedics. And we know that we're not going to necessarily run through the court system because he's a dementia sufferer. It's clinical what he's going through, and he might be physical or he could be completely sexually inappropriate with that. If we don't report that incident and the next crew doesn't know that it's old Mr. Smith and he can be like this, we're putting staff at risk. So I suppose that's where we start to see filtration coming down, and actually that reporting culture and engendering that culture in the trust really helps push that through, because it's just that knock-on effect, and I suppose it's the avalanching effect almost. So yeah, there's that aspect where we get that meaningful and credible intelligence around the potential risks to our staff. We share these with other NHS providers where we get the chance, but I suppose it's just that aspect of risk and caution markers, and I think that's where you probably see more tangible changes coming through. And then you'll have aspects around some of, I suppose, the tangible things like the disparity trends for the demographics. If we know that if a certain hotspot might be an area for, let's just say black men aged 40 to 45, we can think about that in terms of our risk profiling when sending staff, but I suppose it also gives assurance that it might not be a disparity trend. It might just be everybody, I suppose, in that case as well. So there's assurance processes through there which will filter through to the front line and what they're experiencing. Well, I suppose a lot of the work we do around data helps the trust, the support teams, the corporate teams, which then by knock-on effect helps those on the front line.
This episode of the Emergency Services Times podcast is sponsored by MSA Safety, proudly supporting emergency services and first responders on the front line. At MSA Safety, protecting first responders isn't just what we do, it's who we are. We work closely with fire and rescue services across the UK to develop and deliver safety solutions designed to meet your ever-evolving needs. That includes MSA Bristol Firefighter PPE, trusted by services across the UK and beyond, shaped through years of collaboration with frontline teams. It also includes our growing investment in innovation and technology, from the connected M1 SCBA modular solution to our agile, fully managed service model that helps keep crews protected and ready to respond. But for us, safety goes beyond equipment. We believe in standing shoulder to shoulder with the people who dedicate their lives to protecting others, whether it's supporting firefighter charities, backing mental health initiatives, or showing up for community events. MSA is proud to be part of the emergency services family. To learn more about our work in the UK and how we're supporting first responders every step of the way, visit www.msasafety.com. With MSA Safety, when you go in, we go in with you.
So we recently covered the NHS announcement about new support measures for staff. So that's including better access to trauma support and improvements to how safety concerns are handled. How do you think these national changes intersect with the work that you guys are already doing?
I must admit, I had actually initially missed the article, but having subsequently read this, I think it's very welcome. National support, particularly from our Secretary of State, is very welcome. I think we're talking about increased support, national data collection, understanding wider implications of trauma. If we're going to be honest and pat ourselves on the back in the ambulance sector, this is something we've been ahead of the curve with for several years. We are the only sector to have national data. Yes, we're the smallest sector, but it doesn't make it easy to do it. I say we had to go all those years ago when we did that data collection, thinking about what that looked like and categorization of data. So there's something in there about doing this at the national level. That's probably where it needs to be at a long-term strategic plan. But hopefully they've got some sophisticated technology plan. Like I say, I know there is an intention to do a national data collection for violence and what that means in terms of the trust. AI is everybody's buzzwords at the moment, but there are some useful tools out there which could bring that and feed that information through in terms of a system which can actually pull it through and categorize and do all that mapping and save somebody a lot of headaches like I had many years ago. So it's a very welcome announcement. However, I suppose I do feel I need to caution the use of zero tolerance language. It's something which we know is slightly archaic in this space. If you go in the dentist or the pharmacy, it's there. You can see it straight away. I think I've seen it in the Wetherspoons in my local town very recently. But what does zero tolerance even mean? We all have a different tolerance levels to abuse, both physical and I suppose and verbal abuse. And we're seeing patients in a clinical setting. So some of this abuse or violence will actually be clinically driven, people in sort of states of agitation. So the zero tolerance, we just need to make sure that we're very much supporting our staff to understand when they feel like they need to report and when they don't feel like they need to report as well, why they potentially haven't reported it, while also doing what's right for the patients as well. Because we might have people who, like I say, we might have those emerging risks who have done something and they cause an incident and it's the first one ever and it's just a very bad time, something's gone wrong in their lives. Rather than sort of driving everything through that process, it might be judicial, it might be out of court disposals. How do we change the path they're on? Think about things like restorative justice and understand their impact of their behaviour, their actions, and really driving forward and think actually that's a much better outcome for that patient if we never have to see them again, or for many years never have to see them again, rather than saying, well, actually it's a zero tolerance approach. You put hands on one of our staff, we're going to run you through the process because that's what we do.
Culturally, do you think that these kinds of national commitments help people to feel more confident to speak up when something isn't right?
Absolutely. Our people, our staff, they all want to know that when they speak up, their voice is heard and it's taken seriously with the appropriate amount with the appropriate level of seriousness. And one of the things that we often have in a lot of the risk management systems when you report an incident is, do you want it to progress with the police? Now, the police may have been on scene either way, but we often ask that question: do you want us to proceed and progress with the police? You may, like I say, there may be clinical situations where actually they don't want to. They feel like the person didn't have capacity, and that's important. Listen to that, and I suppose not taking it away from, listen to the voice of the victim, if you will. So we need to ensure that the action, what we do need to do is ensure that the actions speak louder than words, and this comes at the very, very top. We saw the 2023 pay deal detail tackling violence and aggression for the first time, I think, to my knowledge. I mean, I've been in the NHS for 19 years, and that's the first time I've recalled that in any kind of pay deal. And I suppose what we're seeing is national funding for programs, VPR pilots, commissions, and evidence-based development that would identify intervention strategies reduce. So I suppose it's almost a little bit of putting your money where your mouth is, and let's see this in some action rather than just words. And I think just to close on that, there's no short-term solution for fixing violence against ambulance and NHS staff. It takes sustained resourcing, strategy, planning, and partnership working. Seeing this deployed will continue to improve the culture within the NHS, and that would help us drive these improvements and actually, like I said, have our people believe in what we're doing. There will always be people out there who've had an adverse experience of violence, not just the violence incident themselves. It might have been the process afterwards with either the trust, the police, the judiciary, the CPS. They may not have got the result that they were hoping for based upon a myriad factors. But what we can do is actually start to see that from the right level. We know we had the Assaults Against the Emergency Workers Act in 2018. There's some work ongoing with that at the moment in terms of looking at sentencing and guidelines. But I think feeling that back into the culture when it's appropriate and right, and I suppose making sure the information is disseminated at the right level, understanding why, I think is often one of the cases, one of the most frustration things of, we'll hear that this didn't progress because of the Capacity Act. Now, we've seen some really interesting work in the anti-violence collaboration in Wales, where it's an all Wales perspective of emergency service, so police, fire and NHS. And one of the things they've done is a joint partnership working agreement where actually if the clinician feels like the person had capacity to progress them through the judiciary, the police should not be able to overrule them on that regard, and then go straight to the sergeant. So considerations like this is actually really, really interesting, because I suppose it's then putting the power back into the clinician who's medically trained to understand this as well. So I think from a cultural perspective, it's great to hear and see at that national level at the Secretary of State. But now it's about putting the actions behind the words and thinking about what that looks like on the short, medium, and the long term.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose one of the trickiest issues in improving safety is honesty and learning from mistakes rather than, covering them up. What's your take on how ambulance services are doing on that front?
I think I would split it. So we have two main sort of areas within the sort of the incident world and in the safety aspect. We've got your patient safety and non-patient safety. Your patient safety perspective, we have a far more developed learning culture for the learning from incidents. We self-report. We say, I could have done something better there, and we go through a whole different process in terms of actually understanding what happened, what went wrong, why, how did our interaction or intervention change the potential clinical pathway for that patient. And that's really important. Obviously, the patient is hugely important in everything that we do, but just as much as so is the staff. And I think when we wind that back to the non-patient safety perspective, and particularly a violence lens, and I think I want to be very careful and indicate that this is not intended as victim blaming. We still have a journey ahead. I think there is very much times when our interactions, our own behaviour may have contributed to an escalation of an incident. Again, that's not necessarily to victim blame, where we are humans as much as the patient is. And, sometimes people argue and frustrations can come up on both sides. But where does our training come in while we haven't applied our conflict resolution, our breakaway, and our disengagement training? Actually, sometimes it's safe just to stay 10 yards away if someone's in a heightened state of agitation, and understand and do a little bit of safety netting, rather than going in high with the ambulance. What's wrong? What can we do for you today? As I suppose also understanding that very human aspect, that we have some very rough jobs. A lot of our staff deal with trauma on the regular. So that human factor is that we might go to the next job and we might not be in the smiliest, happiest mood because we've been to something quite traumatic and nasty in the job before, or we might not have had our meal break because we got into a category 1 on the way back. So there's all of these things that bring that human aspect to this. And I suppose just to fold an extra layer into that, I suppose in recent times I've seen moderate harm incidents where in a patient safety world you'd have a root cause analysis. You might have the duty of candor kicking in, so actually understanding what happened, bringing someone's ties into the investigation and where and why. We don't really have that in the violence world. So it's quite a different perspective, and we're not getting that same level of, I suppose, investigation and root cause analysis within the trust as to why these things are happening. And I suppose pulling the thread on that would say, well, actually, are we able to learn truly from our own incidents if we're not actually understanding to that level of detail when we've got that level of harm and above? We're very fortunate that moderate harm incidents are quite rare. So that's moderate non-permanent harm. But I suppose when we do have them, we've had a couple around the trusts where it's actually, I would encourage them to say, well, let's go through the root cause analysis and actually understand what that meant. We've highlighted some of them. We've publicised one of them. There was a very nasty one down in the southwest, which was released on the 15th of February 2023. The body cam footage was there. Again, that's the gentleman, fantastic job. But I suppose where do we learn from that as a sector? How do we pull that into sector-wide learning? That, you know, sometimes people will punch us, and it's very unfortunate. It's not part of the job. But where do we do that? Where do we learn to say, well, actually, coming back to our data and pull that in? So actually, there's 100 incidents that we've had in this quarter. Feed that back into our conflict resolution training and our training needs analysis, and say, well, actually, there's a use of data which I don't think we do as well as we possibly can. So we say, well, actually, look at these data, look at the types of incidents were happening. Is what we're teaching staff on a I suppose a 3-year refresher period, and that might be broken up into sort of year for the different modules. But actually, how do we use that data to say, well, actually, what we're teaching staff might not necessarily be the best thing for that. Again, pulling those threads around data and that information, I think the honesty is never a problem. Like I say, we report these incidents ourselves, and we'll report them where potentially, like I say, we might have had an argument with someone on a CCTV, and then they've thrown a punch. And we will go through that process. And I think just feeling that and understanding how we learn from those events, that is, so we actually, well, our own trauma, our own personal human factors, trying to take a step back, potentially remove ourselves from a situation to bring that de-escalation to a bit more at the forefront of what we're doing.
Mm. And so looking towards the future, what would you say are your priorities for the next phase of the programme? Are there any new sort of partnerships or tools or data sources that you're looking to bring in?
So I suppose just a little bit of a caveat. We are unfortunately one of the programmes that was externally commissioned by NHS England, and as the funding has ceased. So we are only in place for the next 6 months. So we are now looking to do what we possibly can and make as much impact for the ambulance services as possible within those 6 months. But some of the data sources we're thinking about, so like I said, I've mentioned the NHS staff survey a couple of times. The devolved nations don't have anything, and devolved nations are our members as well. So one of the things I want to do in the next sort of 6 months is see if I can build a devolved nation staff survey using some of the really good points from the NHS England one, but also a couple of other aspects, talking a bit more in depth about things like mental health and trauma. Body cameras is an interesting question. Are we using them enough, particularly if we're surveying staff? So pulling that, and I think if we can do that, there might be a really great legacy piece of work there that actually says that triggers the devolved nations to do this year on year or in a routine, regular fashion. So they're actually getting that benchmark and understanding where they might have progressed or where they might have potentially lost ground to, and thinking about that. We're doing a lot of work around post-incident support, developing public health and VPR guidelines. How do those things intersect and play out? So that when we're thinking about long-term violence prevention, I'll touch on that in a minute. But that public health, it's really important. What is the wider system doing? Because violence is not just against the NHS, against the ambulance service. It's societal now, and other organisations are seeing that. We are looking at sort of national reporting, the VPR standard. It's just been refreshed from NHS England, so we'll do some work around that again, getting the ambulance sector at a consistent level. I suppose the last bit around that is we have an idea around using some artificial intelligence. If we get the opportunity in the next 6 months, we will certainly deploy it. But if we're not, it unfortunately will need funding to deliver. But it would actually really categorise and catch a lot of the abuse against our emergency operations centre call handlers at the forefront. I'm not giving any more information because there's a little bit of IP in there. But it's a really good idea which we would love to deploy, but we might not get the chance to do so.
It's interesting. We'll have to watch this space then. So we are coming towards the end, but we always ask our interviewees about some advice. So if you could give one piece of advice to someone that's working in the ambulance service, whether they're, you know, on the road or more in a support role, who wants to help make things safer, what would you say?
I think I'd like to split that opportunity down into the support roles and the operational roles. But just a caveat, the ambulance service is a wonderful career. You will see the best and unfortunately the worst of people in this roles, but it is a wonderful career. We talk about the violence against that, but a lot of the wholesome aspect of the ambulance service will come through in the job that you do as well. So for our support roles, I think the piece of advice would be use database decision making. What have you got? What have you not got? What do you think you should have as part of your data and your intelligence? Like I said, data can tell you everything. It can tell you nothing, but depending on what you're looking at. So what does your BI look like? What does your dashboard look like? Are you thinking about where incidents are happening? If you're in a hospital, is it a specific ward? If you're in a trust, is a specific area, specific streets? How do we use that and actually work with partner agencies to actually deploy that and say, well, we have a larger risk profile for this type of area, this type of patient, etc., etc. I think for our operational colleagues, I think the biggest piece of advice is one, awareness, understanding your education, your conflict resolution, and your training, and being aware of your personal safety, defensible decision making. We know you want to help people. You're all caring professionals, and it's wonderful, but you can't care for the public if you're not caring for yourself. So be aware of that. And the second aspect is report. It's a great thing to report, even if nothing's happened. You learn more from a near miss than you ever will from an actual incident of legitimate harm. So keep reporting. We know that we're not quite there yet in terms of the incidents, but that reporting might actually stop the next incident from happening because somebody might be forewarned.
Great pieces of advice. Well, our conversation has absolutely flown by, but thank you so much for joining me, Adam. It's been really good to hear about how things are moving forward and what's happening behind the scenes to support staff safety. It feels like there's still quite a long road ahead, but also a real sense of momentum, which is encouraging to hear. Hopefully we'll get to catch up again at the Emergency Services Show on the 17th and 18th of September and hear how things are shaping up by then. And for anyone who's listening, who's working in or around ambulance services, whether you're out on the road or behind the scenes, keep that conversation going. This kind of change really depends on people speaking up and sharing ideas and really backing each other. So we will continue covering the progress over the next 6 months. So watch this space. But thank you again, Adam, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Tom St. John for expertly producing this episode. If you like this episode, then be sure to check out other conversations with leaders in this season of For Every Response, sponsored by MSA Safety. Share the link and subscribe to receive updates on new episodes from us here at Emergency Services Times.